moving, John.
Yep, I got it.
Into the sinkhole.
I got it.
It's moving that much. Oh, that's gone right there. Sit right there. Again. Free fall. Going all in. Oh, that's a good one. Look over there, John, on pad 3.
We pity your pathetic dependence on this web video for your weekly news, but here we go anyway.
Just before the hour, Tom Hartman here with you, and Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at beyondnuclear.org, is on the line with us. Kevin, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Tom.
The Nuclear Regulatory Agency of the country of Japan today, I believe, or maybe it was yesterday, raised the nuclear alert. You can tell us all what the language is, but they kicked this thing up from a 1 to a 3. What's at Fukushima? What's the significance of this? What's going on?
Yeah, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is an agency of the United Nations. Supposed nuclear safety regulator, but it's a nuclear power promoter by mandate, has this International Nuclear Event Scale, INES. It's got 7 stages on it. And this leak that just happened from these storage tanks at Fukushima Daiichi, originally the Japan Nuclear Regulation Authority was going to make it a 1, which officially is technically called an anomaly. Well, just in the last 24 hours, as you said, they're now talking a 3, which is a serious incident, and that's a 100-fold increase in severity,
right.
And that is regarded as serious. And 7 is the highest rung on this ladder, which is a global catastrophe, in my words. And only Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi have reached the 7th rung on this scale. But as a colleague, John LaForge with Nukewatch in Wisconsin put it, back at the time, 2.5 years ago, well, there were 3 meltdowns and 4 explosions at Fukushima Daiichi. So isn't that at least a 3 times 7 or a 21 on this scale? So this latest leak of 300 tons of highly radioactive water into the soil, flowing now with the groundwater towards the ocean, you know, they call it a 3, but, you know, the ocean is just getting hammered at Fukushima Daiichi.
Is this a logarithmic scale, the way the Richter scale is?
Yes, it is. Each rung on the ladder is 10 times more serious.
Wow. So going from 1 to 2 isn't doubling it, it's increasing it 10-fold, and going from 2 to 3 is increasing it 100-fold from the 1, or 10-fold from the 2.
And the Nuclear Regulation Authority has admitted, you know, 100-fold increase in the seriousness.
Why has this not been called a 7?
Well, you know, the 7 might be if another earthquake hits the site, and they have something like 262 of these giant tanks, the same design, the same size as the one that just leaked.
So let's just recap this. Out of these 262 tanks, one of them just leaked. Just leaked, what, yesterday, last week? How big is the tank? Where's the tank?
In the last day or two, they've admitted to this latest leak, and it's 300 tons of highly radioactive water. It's giving off a dose rate of 10 rem per hour, and the way they discovered the leak were puddles on the ground giving off 10 rem per hour. You could get a worker dose, which is a high thing, within 5 hours, and you could get a fatal dose just standing next to a 5 rem puddle, you know, after a certain amount of time.
Wow. And a rem, of course, is 1,000. I mean, there's 1,000. Is it 1,000 millirems or 1,000,000 millirems in a rem? 1,000
millirem make 1 rem, and workers
and 1,000,000
internationally are limited to 2 rem per year.
Wow.
Members of the public to a mere 100 millirem per year under normal circumstances. So this thing is giving off 5 rem per hour, I think is the figure.
So that's pretty much the level of radioactivity that the core material itself would have, isn't it?
Sorry, I misspoke. 10 rem per hour from this puddle of water on the ground. No, if you get into the core material, I mean, you're talking just unimaginable dose rates. You're talking, I don't even know if it's millions of rems per hour.
Wow.
But that's an instant. If you were to get close to the cores without radiation shielding, you would be dead within a second.
Wow. Wow.
From gamma radiation. What
is the... so far, I mean, we've had a lot of workers, or Japan has had a lot of workers exposed to this. Has anybody disclosed the consequences of this? Do we know how many people have been directly affected by the Fukushima meltdown?
Well, even the Japanese government now admits that 10,000 Fukushima Daiichi workers will qualify really for lifetime coverage, at least health checkups and perhaps even compensation, because they've exposed themselves, they've been exposed to enough radiation dose to be at risk of leukemia. And there's other categories, probably thousands of Fukushima Daiichi workers are going to qualify for it, but there have been probably 100,000 workers on that site, all exposed to varying levels of radioactivity. So again, they're going to make it difficult for workers to qualify for those benefits, unfortunately.
What about the families who lived in this neighborhood when the plant went down and there was all that initial radiation that the government was pretending wasn't there?
Well, there's still 150,000 or more nuclear refugees scattered all over Japan, and they've left for other countries as well. And some of the startling, alarming news that's just coming out yet again is childhood thyroid cancer, which is a very rare disease. In fact, most years there are 0 cases in 100,000 in Japan, and it looks like those numbers, at least in Fukushima Prefecture, are increasing among children and adolescents that were exposed to the radioactive iodine-131, which is a vicious poison that attacks the human thyroid gland.
Right, right, and this is terrible. So, Kevin, what can they do? They've got these buildings that are tottering. They're on an earthquake fault zone. At the top of these 5-10-story buildings, they've got these giant pools filled with radioactive material. Rather than at ground level, and what's next?
Well, Tokyo Electric is admitting it's beyond their coping ability. They're asking for international assistance at long last. The Japanese government, just in the last couple of weeks, has said we're going to step in. This is under, a pro-nuclear Prime Minister Abe.
Yeah.
So finally, there's some recognition that this is just out of control. And you mentioned, why not a level 7? Well, if a big earthquake hits that site and hundreds of these containers were to let loose the hundreds of thousands of tons of highly radioactive water they contain, I think that might certainly qualify as a level 7.
How are they getting all these containers there? They're just all over Japan. They're building, 100-ton water containers and shipping them to Fukushima to fill with water. Is that the deal?
Yeah, those 262 giant tanks are actually, I think the figure is 1,000-ton water tanks, and the one that leaked 300 tons of its 1,000-ton capacity. But there's even smaller sized, and you're talking now not 262, but many hundreds of these tanks spreading onto the hillsides. They're building them and trying to keep up with this flood.
Amazing, amazing. This is a disaster of unimaginable proportions, and it's a disaster that could happen at any one of over 100 nuclear power plants in the United States, and in fact we have over 30 or over 50 nuke plants built in the same model as the Japanese. Which is it, Kevin? We've lost.
We have 23 identical designs and another 8 that are very similar.
Okay, thank you.
You're listening to Tom Hartman.
In other news, a proud species commits suicide rather than being driven to extinction by humans.
Live, this is One for the Record. I'm Diana, and today is August 22nd, 2013. A real big show tonight for you. Lots of footage. I got the raw footage from the Louisiana sinkhole swallowing the tree. There's another footage also. A different view of another tree. And it just wouldn't let me, when I couldn't get it from one channel to the next, which was ridiculous. But I'll figure it out one day so you can see this other footage too. It seemed like something grabbed it, pushed a tree up, and then pulled it down. Wow, it's weird. But alrighty then. Not on the footage though you probably just saw though. There's other footage, and it won't let me grab it for some reason. Something's up with it. Alright. So, let's first go to the Extinction Protocol 2012 and beyond. Monster sinkhole still growing. Assumption Parish video shows sinkhole swallowing trees in seconds. The footage though, I think that's the footage I got for you. Might have been the Extinction Protocol. Alright. Because I couldn't capture it off of the watch. It wouldn't let me comment it so I could get it over to the one for the record, the Feel Free Music channel. I don't know. Big problem still with this when they changed all this. Alright. Great Awakening. Indonesia warns of rising volcanic activity in East Province. In Indonesia's submarine Mount Hobart volcano rumbles to life in brief eruption. 6.2 magnitude earthquake shakes Acapulco, Mexico. Also, no, that's it for today. Let's see, keep going. Moving on. Let's go to the watchers watching the world. Everything's all jumbled around. Right, lots of news tonight. I'm uploading. I'm gonna give you one big show of all kinds of stuff. I also have, stay tuned, I have Fridays, which is last Friday. I finally was able to get a hold of the Nutimedical report, Dr. Deagle's Nutimedical report. It wasn't anywhere where I could grab it. I had to go into an archive and get it for you. Alright. Hunt for asteroids. Decommissioned WISE spacecraft to be reactivated as asteroid hunter. Researchers propose that sugars be taxed like other harmful and addictive substances. Wow. I wonder if they're taxing the people releasing all the radiation over there and in Japan. Is there a tax on them? Fukushima, are we taxing Fukushima? Strong and shallow earthquake magnitude 6.2 struck Guerrero, Mexico. Alright, let's move on. Let's go to the breaking news. It's not all lined up right now because I kept having to go in 5 different ways and a back door to get you this footage you probably saw already, but it was good footage. California's rim fire grows to 63,366 acres, is 1% contained. That's coming out of Cal Fire 23 minutes ago. National Weather Service, Tropical Depression 9E to become a tropical storm by Friday. And that's coming out of NHC Pacific. Numerous closed and flooded roads in Colorado across El Paso County and Colorado Springs due to flooding right now. That was 1 hour ago. Heads up. Alrighty then, moving on. Let's go into E&E News, Energy News. A lot of news there. Let's go there. Alright. Today, media now exposing Fukushima cover-up. So many terrible things are not being reported. Official radiation figures cannot be trusted. Regulator suspects TEPCO giving government false data. Problems much worse than officials claim. Also, senior scientists. Chernobyl was nothing with potential of Fukushima right on ocean. No way to contain all of this radioactive water. You can't stop groundwater flow. Every bit of news we're getting is radioactivity numbers are going up. Also today, Wall Street Journal. They don't know where Fukushima's melted fuel cores are or in what state. Expert. It's important to think of worst case scenario. Even greater levels of contamination may be on the way. Plant built on a river. Wow. Alright, TV. Isn't Fukushima Daiichi at least a 21 on International Nuclear Event Scale? Equal to 3 level 7s? Global catastrophe. Disaster of unimaginable proportions. Also today, UPI. Fukushima plant is approaching a worst case scenario. Top Japan nuclear official. This is what we have been fearing. How do we know it didn't happen already? Would they tell us if it did? What do you think? CNN, Japan's nuclear regulator called Fukushima a house of horrors. They are not prone to hyperbole, an unbelievable thing to say. Very, very serious, incredibly frightening. Also today, nuclear expert on BBC. Absolutely no guarantee walls of Fukushima fuel pools aren't cracked. Salt water would basically explode the walls. You can't see that. You can't get close enough. BBC. Fukushima much worse than we've been led to believe. Much worse, says nuclear expert. Contaminated water is leaking out all over site. Yesterday, New York Times. Potential for huge spill of highly radioactive liquid from many Fukushima tanks all at once, says nuclear design expert. Top official. Leaks from more tanks are the biggest concern. We are extremely concerned. Really? Okay. NYT. Fears of environmental calamity from Fukushima disaster. Japan nuclear expert. It's getting worse. People all over the world need to be informed. First case in history where so much contaminated water flowing in ocean. Alright. Here we go. Here's another one from yesterday. Reuters. Crisis deepening at Fukushima nuclear plant upgraded to level 3 serious incident. Represents a 100-fold increase in severity of radiological release. TEPCO says highly radioactive leakage continues but unknown where from. Alright. Let's go into U.S. Canada. You realize that all the news venues, everyone with any common sense that can get to the things that all of us that are alternative news reporters, basically we were doing the mainstream media job by reporting on all of this continuously. Well, we can't get into U.S. Canada right now. Something's going on. This page can't be displayed. So, something's going on with the sinkhole. That's all I got to say. Alright. I better end this right now. Stay tuned. It is 4 days down, the eve of Friday. We're almost there. Be prepared for anything, any case scenario. I want you to really be prepared. Alrighty then. Take care. And I'll see you tomorrow on the flip side. Be safe.
Welcome back, and we have our co-host this hour, the third hour on Friday, which is one of our most popular hours. John Moore has his own show with co-host, and Morris is on Republic Radio, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, Monday to Friday. And John and Ann, give us kind of highlights. We have a number of converging issues. The one that's right at the forefront the last few days is all these converging airborne plagues. And you've got a report you just sent me this morning, John. Right. What do you make of it?
Well, that's from the CDC, of course, so it's obviously mainstream. I'm no scientist, but what I get from it is apparently two of these viruses are combining. The H1N1 and H3N2 have combined. There's some concern apparently on the part of some of these scientists that there could be further combination with the H7N9.
Exactly. In fact, Henry mentioned that last night, too. That what happened is between the H1N1 and the H3N2V, they've now combined and have all 5 genes to receptor binding domain, which means they can open the lock of the door, attach to human cells very avidly, and now you got a repository of current flu that's circulating in the population that could be, quote, in a mixing vessel, a person or an animal, that could then combine with H7N9 if it arrives, or another virus from the Middle East, H1N9 or some other virus, but the H7N9 is a biggie we're watching because the virus replicates 80,000 times faster than any other flu virus in history. And they decided last week they were going to start in the lab adding the receptor binding domain to see how bad it is, because right now it doesn't have it. I think it only has 1 or 2 genes. So it's not very easily spread, but it can spread. They had the first case they reported in China of a daughter that picked it up from taking care of her father by exposed to a lot of bodily fluids. And he died and she died shortly thereafter. That's the first human-to-human spread. So it's not a very easily spread, the H7N9 in China, but the case fatality rate, if you get it, which is not easy to get, but if you get it, is 36% or 18 times the 1918 flu. Similarly, we have the SARS-2 virus. It's easy to get a mild case, but if it goes deep in your lungs, you can only have about a 10% chance of survival. So if these viruses recombine with other viruses like the SARS-2 coronavirus, with other viruses, because they're a distant relative of the cold virus, with other populations that have similar viruses in, say, North America and animal populations, the H5N1, for example, in the bird populations in North America, has the potential to cross over and get the receptor binding domain, or combine with H7N9, because it does have part of the genes, and all of a sudden you get a pandemic, I call it Armageddon virus.
Right. I think the term self-quarantine is going to become very popular.
You're an expert on that. The average pandemic, by the way, a wave will last 6 to 10 weeks. So if you're not prepared to self-quarantine, and if you go out, by the way, and this is a government term, you are considered an enemy combatant. So if, let's say, October 19th, we have a CDC alert that comes out and says we had 159 cases in Chicago, we have a national alert, staying home. If you can't stay at home 6 to 10 weeks, and you're not only an enemy combatant because we may have military on the streets to try to prevent you or tag you to friend or foe and haul you off and say we're going to give you a drug or vaccine, which is useless, or put you in civil detention. Right. But the issue is this. If you go out there and these pandemic viruses, you're not only going to infect yourself, you could bring it back to your family and kill everybody. So the waves are going to pass 6 to 10 weeks, and then you might be a number of months before the next wave happens. It could be like in 1918, I think it was like 8 or 9 months before the next wave happened, and then 2 or 3 months later the third wave happened. Over the 11-year course of the Asian flu, there were many waves over a period of 11 years. So these waves had new genetic changes, new changes in receptor binding domain, new pathological changes in terms of its internal chemistry and how it affects the body, new changes to how the virus grows in different temperatures inside the respiratory tract. All very important.
Well, looks like we're in for a wild ride to me.
I would predict, and this is not a prophecy, but a prediction, our first wave is and I'm just saying one of these 3 or 4 candidate viruses, airborne plague this fall. Number 2, we're going to have, and I know Joel Skousen said we're not going to have an economic bloat, because we won't have a full bloat, but we're going to have enough pain and suffering. It's going to push us toward what they're really pushing is a biometric world currency, because you got to see that the reason for these databases like in Utah and 147 other is to have a biometric world database system in America and in other countries, because they want to move to a biometric world currency. It's not to make it safer. This is to bring in the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is a biometric currency that controls every bit of your actions, and they have to control your SIM in a database to control you. Otherwise, you could barter, you could exchange things, you could have bitcoins, you could do all kinds of encrypted communications, a peer-to-peer network, and if they can know every one of your actions, it's almost like, I think there's a database, I don't know the term for it, someone out there probably knows this, but there's a term where the government monitors all your transactions and your credit cards and your IRS, etc. And if it looks like you're spending more money than you should be making, there's red alerts that go to the FBI, the local police, and other people to kind of watch you, or to haul you in and say, well, what are you doing? So, it's like in British Columbia, Canada, the Canadian government uses a smart meter system to know that if somebody in rural, let's say Kelowna, is using too much power, they could have a grow-op making marijuana in their, 3-level basement below the house, because they're using more power than they should be from the Power Corporation of British Columbia.
Right.
The same thing is what they're planning on doing. They want to know what magazines you order, what books you order, what supplements you order. Are you running a business that they don't agree with? Who are your contacts? They have a watch list and what I call a pickup list. And part of the reason for this system is they want to know that 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 million people that are going to resist when the hammer drops. They want to know who they are. They don't necessarily have to get everybody, you just have to get the list.
Right.
I call the red you're dead list. The green list will send you off to the civil detention training camp. The blue you're okay, you go along with us list. Blue is the training, green is the okay list. And you have to know these ideas have been circulating around for decades because these geniuses of manipulation have thought these ideas 40, 50, 60 years ago. It's nothing new, is it, John?
No, nothing at all. It's all old stuff, right?
So what do you think is next? What's your way? Because one of the things that I'm a little frustrated is I'm trying to get a hold of Professor McCanney. I see more and more evidence coming in that we have hyperelliptical comets, and talked about it last week. I wanted to expand on that. We know they're being pushed in from the Oort cloud by something. We have increasing evidence that there's increased volcanism and strange activity on the sun with it flipping its pole, and on increased volcanism and nuclear activity on all the planets, which are all basically nuclear reactors with a crust on them. Saturn, Jupiter. The only one that doesn't, by the way, is Mars, which basically has a dead core, so it doesn't have a magnetic field. The magnetic field of the moon, of the Mars, is like minuscule. It's like 1/100th or less than ours because it doesn't have a molten core like us. So it doesn't have a nuclear reactor. It doesn't have a Van Allen radiation belt around it. So Mars really couldn't be, if you want to call it, terraformed unless we actually artificially created a magnetic sphere around the planet Mars in order to protect it. And that's probably part of the reason why Mars had its atmosphere and its water stripped off it, because it didn't have any protective magnetosphere.
Right.
Interesting, eh?
It is very interesting.
And it's probably tied directly. And any comments about this flu and about the ultraviolet light issues? We now have, by the way, meters for LSCMF and B meters, B meter, and a C meter for LSCMF. We also have a very good data logging nuclear detector that's about half the price of the Inspector Plus or Inspector EXP. It's not as sensitive. I tell people the one that I'd recommend would be an Inspector EXP, because it has an arm so you can swing around over your fish and say click, 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 see away. So what you do is you kind of get your bullhorn out, like Alex Jones, which I love his bullhorn. You get your bullhorn out beside your radiation detector, and you have a nuclear safety sign on your chest. You drop it down, and say, back away from the fish counter.
That would be very handy.
You can imagine that put up on YouTube, how popular that would be, right?
Right.
Somebody else is videotaping you with their iPhone or their Android. While you're backing away from the fish counter, so you're farting in all of the areas you follow. volcanism, earthquakes, ultraviolet light, Earth changes, space weather, near-Earth space objects. We just had another, I guess, meteor storm that really passed through, and we have a lot of controversy, which is hard to get an answer from Professor McCanny as to what he thinks about all this. I know there's a storm going on him and people like, I'm not going to mention his last name, John, and various other individuals, over what we call the Planet X. I don't like to call it Planet X. I call it what it really is. It's Nemesis. It's a red dwarf star, not a brown dwarf. It is probably pretty far out there. Most likely it's, pulled by Saturn or further. But there is an object that's been pushing in elliptical comets from the Oort cloud, which is 0.73 light years away from the sun. That's a long ways out. 0.73 light years. That's a lot. That means it takes, 3/4 of a year for the light to actually get there. That's a long way out. So, whatever this object is, it has a hyperelliptic orbit that comes in about every 3,600 years. This is the same, quote, star that returned the twin of the sun, the evil twin, if you want to call it, the destroyer, the winged destroyer that the cartouches in Egypt can show you. I believe it's out there, but I don't believe it's in the inner solar system. It's coming in, though. And I'm not going to give you dates or times, but I know its effects are things like the Ison comet, the CME that happened 3 weeks ago, that they had a number of former CIA agents, and you can look at it on yourself. Just go to YouTube, and you can find it's a recent CME. You can see it where they had a discussion to say, we're really freaked out by this now, because if it hit us, it would have wiped out the satellites in our ground-based generation. We have ultraviolet lights shifting because the sun's putting out more light, and we're geoengineering that is destroying the atmosphere, and we have Fukushima destroying the upper ozone layer, all increasing dangerous ultraviolet B, C, and D light, all bad. And we're talking about death of the forest, the phytoplankton, and the crops. We have none of the death of the bees, and this is one of 4 or 5 factors why the bees are dying, one of the big factors, along with neonicotinoid pesticides, cell phones, Wi-Fi networks, genetically modified foods that create bacillus thuringiensis toxins in the bees' gut. So when people say on like a Time magazine, we got to figure this out, we have to figure it out, but we won't do it. We won't stop the pesticides. We won't stop the Wi-Fi network. We won't stop geoengineering the upper atmosphere because they want to weaponize the planet. So, and what's the latest in all these space weather and other issues, including the flu?
Okay, well, I want to talk about MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And they think that they have found a sentinel, that is a cat. And it seems like the cat catches this MERS. And as far as I know, that's the only animal that they've tested that actually gets sick and dies from the MERS. It takes it about 3 days to die. And,
really? Is this a cat that lives in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, these were all cats that lived, that were, yes.
Are they feral, like a domesticated cat, or are they kind of a wild?
Well, they haven't said. They said that the veterinary examined them, and he thinks that it's the coronavirus MERS, and he's going to send the samples off, and they're going to identify it. From his description of the disease, though, it sounds very much like MERS. They died of kidney failure. They died of respiratory. Yes.
Yeah, so, that's really interesting.
Well, it's very interesting and it's very helpful to us, because if we have a sentinel, then we know when it's around us. Because if your cat dies, then you better know that you've probably been exposed and you need to do something drastic pretty fast. So this is this could be very beneficial.
This is really
for
bad.
us. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Now I tell people preventively to start off with taking at least 2 of the 3 antipathogenics: Nutridyne, Silver 100, Alimston Med. They should be taking, getting the first-line defense kit, which has the NutriDefense, which has lauric acid and nisin. It has the most powerful catechin that blocks the receptor binding domain, which is ECGC catechin. It has the IP6, which blocks the free iron, so free iron is necessary for viruses or pathogens to cut through tissue planes. I designed this years ago. It's the most powerful, if you want to call it virus blocking, receptor binding domain blocking nutraceutical you can get. Then you can take immunoglobulins and high-dose Power C, because the real danger is the cytokine storm. We have also Allergon that'll block the cytokine storm too. People need to be ready to deal with that. We need to be ready for hazmat level issues when there's an explosion from Fukushima. I don't think people are ready to even have a raincoat they can hang outside, and shoes, and a kind of decon procedure manual that they need to start working on. But you're an expert on this, because if we have an explosion in Fukushima, people need to realize they need to leave their radioactive clothes outside, especially if it's raining. They do not want to be bringing radioactive raincoats and, and boots and umbrellas inside the house. They need to realize they need to have a filter and have to seal off their house. They need to maybe realize, yes, you could survive this, but you may be able to look out 95% of you could survive this, but you may be able to look out 95% of the particles or air suspended. But this is coming. It's not a matter of if, but when are we going to get such a big spike? We're seeing little spikes, but we're going to get some big spikes from Japan, where there's a hydrovolcanic explosion, a hydrogen explosion, a true nuclear explosion, which could create a tsunami. We literally could have the prophecies that they talk about the dragon of Japan, which, by the way, these ancient prophecies are like the whole spine of the dragon is the islands of Japan. And Mount Fuji is like the tail of the dragon. And when Mount Fuji recharges, which it blows every 150 years, and the fault line that runs from Fukushima runs directly to the magma chamber at Mount Fuji. Not a good thing.
And it's good to have outdoor clothes and indoor clothes, and to take off your outdoor clothes when you're outdoors and put on. Actually, you should wrap yourself up and go to the shower right away and lather up and shower before you even greet your family. And be sure to get a good lather, and then put on your inside clothes. And then you've got to do something about decontaminating your outside clothes.
Right.
Yeah,
By the way, what you need to do if you have an outside garden is you got to cover it with poly, and you should filter your water before you water your plants. My water to my plants is all filtered, but it doesn't rain very often. But if I thought there was a big radiation storm, I'm going to get 2x4s and 100 mil poly, and I'm going to create literally a canopy over, or have these ring canopies. You have the ring ones you can buy. You can literally pull it out in a matter of 20 minutes over, a bunch of trees, or your crops. So you literally can have a kind of a portable greenhouse, because you've got to realize we could have the danger of a major radiation release that literally can make all of our food radioactive. And of course, they talk about California as a salad bowl for America. Because of the UV light, we're also having major crop failures here. Tomato crops, many of the other crops, like lettuce crops, are a fraction of what they usually are. So, and that's not just a joke, because there's plenty of water here in the Imperial Valley. And what we're having is radiation shock that's actually killing the plants now. And it's reaching a level where the plants can't cope with it anymore. It's almost like you get a young person, you push them hard enough, and they can run 20 miles, but when you run to the 35th mile, they can't do another 5 miles before they collapse, before they get so dehydrated they can actually go into heat shock. And you, of course, you know that, John, that even if a person's really healthy, if you push them too hard, you can cause a cardiac arrest.
Absolutely. It happens on football fields every summer.
Right, and we see that happening here too. But the plants have a lot of capacity to adapt to, the sun doesn't put a constant level of light out. Everybody thinks it's like, God switches on the light, it's time to get up in the morning. No. The quality of light, the frequency and spectrum of light, the intensity of light is changing moment to moment, and day to day, and month to month, and there's major shifts in frequency. And now the shift is to toxic, as they say in South Africa, toxic sun. We now have a toxic sun. We're geoengineering the upper atmosphere, and now we have Fukushima all destroying the ability to protect the bad radiation from our hitting.
Summertime is sale time.
Yeah, talking about blocking the virus, high-dose Power C, vitamin D, I tell people go to 50 to 100 units a day, which is easy to do with our 5,000 IU soft gels. Power C Plus, most powerful is NutriDefense, which blocks the receptor binding domain, blocks free iron, and also has lauric acid that disrupts the viral capsid. Now, viruses, their DNA and RNA viral capsids do not covalently bond. They're electrostatic. They're non-covalent, but they're like Lego blocks. They snap together because they're shaped to actually snap electrostatically together because of their shape or stereotactic conformation. So if you put lauric acid, it kind of screws it up. It's like putting, grit and little tiny rocks on the Lego blocks. They can't snap together. So the capsid falls apart and the virus is naked and it's easily destroyed. So naked virus particles, RNA and DNA, are easily destroyed just by environment. So that's how it works. It's pretty simple. And if you combine that with Silver 100, Nutridyne, Allison Med, and bye-bye, you cannot produce enough viral particles to get an effective state.
The MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, attaches to the DPP4 receptors.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Vitamin D, hydrous piracy, and more importantly, the anhydrous catechin. And people will say, well, I take green tea, I do this or that. Look, those get inactivated so quickly within minutes, not even hours. Most of it is going, bye-bye, see you later. They're so metabolically and chemically active, they'll grab a hold of any chemical. In fact, if you take green tea, that's why people drink it. It'll even grab, the thiols from your bad breath. So people that drink a lot of green tea don't get prostate cancer. They don't have bad breath. They don't have thiols because it grabs them so quickly, chemicals. But it becomes inactive. So if you're trying to bind the receptor binding domain of the virus, you need something that's persisting, has a long half-life, and bioavailability in the body. And it has to be activated when it's put in a person, not been activated 6 months before when it's in the bottle.
Yeah, well, this MERS, apparently it kills people that have uncontrolled blood sugar, and they track that down to the DPP4 receptor. Well,
the reason why that is because free radicals are the can opener for virus entry, and they do it through the Fenton reaction with iron, free iron, and they produce what's called hydroxyl radical and hydroperoxy radical, and it breaks down the barrier, and that's why iron and heavy metals and free radicals, and when you get glycation, called advanced glycosylation end products from sugar, you basically down the barrier so it's easier for pathogens to enter tissue planes. So that's why you get fungi, viruses, mycobacteria enter. Diabetics, pre-diabetics are loaded to the gills, including their eyeballs, their brain, their heart, their blood vessels, their lymphatics, everything is loaded. Loaded up with pathogens. They're loaded up with many different classes of pathogens, not just viruses. And when you start taking these antipathogenics, and you start taking our living probiotic and probiotic ultra and immunomax immunoglobulins, the body just kicks all these guys out, and they don't have a chance. So a lot of it is what I call internal hygiene, not just external. But we don't have external hygiene. We don't have HEPA filters in our homes. They're properly changed regularly. We don't seal off our windows and doors, which you can do with duct tape. John is an expert on this. We talk about our prepper stuff. We don't have we call secure airports, where we have separate filtration systems for different parts of the airport, and each one has its own chain of custody form sent out to a lab regularly to know where something happened. We don't have a chain of custody for an aircraft coming into an American point of contact. We don't track the individuals for the next 10 to 12 days after to see if they get sick. Then, if necessary, bring them in for a Z-stat, flu test, or not only swabs or nasal cultures, because you drop a feeding tube down their lung and suck a little bit of mucus out from their airways. We'll even do a bronchoscopy. You can easily do it with a feeding tube down their nose. And you can actually send it off to a viral lab. I've done that. In fact, I had viral cultures in my lab because I'm a curious guy. When I was in Denver, I was one of the sentinel labs for the CDC in the state university lab, where even so-called infectious disease weren't doing viral cultures. I did. So I do viral cultures and send them off to the lab and say, well, what's going on, Deagle? I said, well, the report I got was it's this and this. I said, oh, you're kidding. I didn't believe that. So the problem is we're not doing that, except when, and it's after the fact, we get the CDC with sequences like this Henry Nyman report, and he's really good. And what's happening out there is very scary. When you got a burden of virus, you got a repository in the animals, like H5N1 is in all 5 continents of wild animals. We got H7N9, which replicates 80,000 times faster than the other flu virus. We've got a repository supposedly in cats. The other report they're saying is maybe also based on antibodies in camels.
No, they don't think it's not a repository in cats. It kills cats.
Yeah, but what the repository they think is in camels. What happens is that these viruses can recombine, meaning they can swap genes. It's like viruses having sex. They swap, hey, I like that sequence of genes you have over there. Do you want to swap that for this sequence? And virus says, hey, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go for a date. They do. They go for a date and they swap genes. And when they swap those genes, all of a sudden, gene says, hey, I got all 5 receptor binding domains. Human body, let's have fun. And fun isn't fun. Virus goes in, takes over your endoplasmic reticulum, decides to make virus particles rather than parts of your cells. And those virus particles, finally the cell says, you know, I've had too many virus particles, I feel a pain in my tummy, meaning the cell's going to burst. Those virus particles go everywhere. The body goes in a state of shock, says, oh my gosh, there's too many virus particles. The immune system dumps a ton of cytokines, and you don't die necessarily of the virus, you die of the alarm your body does by releasing a ton of things to stop the virus. And these cytokines can cause you to go into cardiogenic shock, make your tissues leak so you blow up like a balloon, cause cardiac arrest, cause, you know, a bleeding diathesis where you go into what's called DIC. It's really scary stuff, and you can use, like Dr. Moskowitz has said from the University of Washington in St. Louis, chemotherapy, but just high-dose power C, Nutridefense, and Allergon, and Nutriodine will actually block a cytokine storm. You don't need to wait and think, oh, well, I can't get into medical facility. Well, you better have the stuff stockpiled, because I think we're in a very high likelihood of an airborne plague this fall or spring. I would say very, very high likelihood. I'd say somewhere between 70 and 95%. Does that sound reasonable, John, or Ann?
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, one or the other. And parallel to that, we're going to have a bond market blowout, because I expect what we call a black October. I think September, they're kind of let things float along. Ben Bernanke will not really do anything to cut everything by September. By October, this financial ship, somebody's going to decide to say, you know what? It's time to take a fire axe to the bottom of the lifeboat. And they'll have had a little bit of what I call financial PCP. And they'll think it's a good idea to let the water into the lifeboat, because if they can't do it, we're not going to make it. So you mean financial PCP, like that, eh? And that's what I see coming. And I see these guys, and it's all engineered, just like these, and like McCain, kind of almost sitting there like a frustrated child thinking, I got to start a war in the Middle East. I'm going to go visit these Al-Qaeda guys. Hey, guys, I see you have some Stinger missiles. Where do you get? Oh, the State Department gave you them. But you don't have any heavy weapons. Do you have attack helicopters? Do you have jets? Do you have real good long-range missiles? You got those junk from Russia, Grads. We got better stuff than the Grad missiles. We'll on the show. He's in a rural area where whatever he's doing his research is really difficult to get hold of him. I can drop an email, sometimes catch him by Skype for a few minutes, or he calls me back. He's had a running battle with people like John DiNardo and a number of other characters. And the Yowza guy, I didn't even want to mention his name. There really is something out in space there, but I highly doubt that the information that these people have is valid enough to even predict a specific time window. Even if some of it is correct, they can't take their 2 or 3 data points and then say, well, we have an orbit now, we know when this is coming in and what time it is. It's my guess that the dwarf star, and it's not a brown dwarf, by the way, it's a red dwarf. It's a red dwarf because of the magnetic field flux lines, which will have effect at a distance. Brown dwarfs don't. They have only effects in gravity. A red dwarf, though, has a powerful magnetic field that potentially, according to the work that I've seen, it's 200 times stronger than the magnetic field of the entire sun. That's a big deal. And the reason why is it's going to cause plasma storms in the sun. It's a big problem right now, and it could be for, who knows, many years when this finally does come in, but it could be, 8-10 years or more. But right now is all these comets coming in, and the latest one is not only the Ison comet, but sighting spring. So Ann, tell us about these comets. These are hyperelliptical comets. They're being pushed in from the Oort cloud by something, i.e., and people call it Planet X. It isn't. It's a star. It's a twin star to the sun. It's basically a stillborn star. We'll call it a red dwarf star. And 80% of the stars in our Milky Way galaxy, and that's 400 billion stars, 80% of them have at least a twin star, and many of them have, there's some actually as many as 6 stars in some kind of complex orbital pattern, literally are kind of going through this kind of electronic dance, almost like like grains of sand vibrating on a drum that you could see, and they're dancing around each other out in deep space. So it's not an anomaly. This is actually the standard thing to have a dwarf star coming in hyperelliptical orbit, being pulled in a long sequence, and it may even have orbital objects around it that are coming in too. But the big danger right now is these hyperelliptical comets grazing the sun are coming close enough to start off with coronal mass ejection if it comes in. I don't know if I would believe the times and date, which is, crying wolf too often. The guys that say this of the kill zone and this and that, they're always wrong. They're always flogging a new book, a new video, a new this and that. It gets nauseating. And that's why Professor McKinney, I think, is being careful. But on the other side, he's written books and made on television appearances talking about, quote, Planet X is very likely a star or a large planet-like object. And he's presented a lot of evidence over the past decade. So I think Professor McKinney is trying to, not make any commitments, but these guys are trying to push him.
Well, he's made his record, and he can stand on his record without having to really say much else.
Right. Now, I think that's good. And what I want to do, though, is clarify. I agree with McKinney I think this object is pretty far out. My guess is at least double the distance of Jupiter, but it is coming in. And what's coming in right now are not only one or two comets, but probably a whole trail of these guys. When it really starts being a light show is when this object starts to get into the area of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Then you're just going to really start seeing things start to go crazy. And as it crosses the ecliptic, and we start seeing superstorms on the sun, that's going to get bad just because of the presence at a distance of the sun. John, on your show, you've known for years of Professor McCanney, and I'm trying to get him back on the show. He's in a rural area where whatever he's doing his research, it's really difficult to get hold of him. I can drop him an email, sometimes catch him by Skype for a few minutes, or he calls me back. He's in a running battle with people like John DiNardo and a number of other characters. And the Yowza guy, I didn't even want to mention his name. There really is something out in space there, but I highly doubt that the information that these people have is valid enough to even predict a specific time window. Even if some of it is correct, they can't take their 2 or 3 data points and then say, well, we have an orbit now, we know when this is coming in and what time it is. It's my guess that the dwarf star, it's not a brown dwarf, by the way, it's a red dwarf. It's a red dwarf because of the magnetic field flux lines, which will have effect at a distance. Brown dwarfs don't. They have only effects in gravity. A red dwarf, though, has a powerful magnetic field that potentially, according to the work that I've seen, it's 200 times stronger than the magnetic field of the entire sun. That's a big deal. And the reason why is it's going to cause plasma storms in the sun. It's a big problem right now, and it could be for, who knows, many years when this finally does come in, but it could be, 8, 10 years or more. But right now is all these comets coming in, and the latest one is not only the ISON comet, but Sighting Spring. So Ann, tell us about these comets. These are hyperelliptical comets. They're being pushed in from the Oort cloud by something, i.e., and people call it Planet X. It isn't. It's a star. It's a twin star to the sun. It's basically a stillborn star. We'll call it a red dwarf star. And 80% of the stars in our Milky Way galaxy, and that's 400 billion stars, 80% of them have at least a twin star, and many of them, there's some actually as many as 6 stars in some kind of complex orbital pattern, literally are kind of going through this kind of electronic dance, almost like like grains of sand vibrating on a drum that you could see, and they're dancing around each other out in deep space. So it's not an anomaly. This is actually the standard thing to have a dwarf star coming in hyperelliptical orbit, being pulled in a long sequence, and it may even have orbital objects around it that are coming in too. But the big danger right now is these hyperelliptical comets grazing the sun are coming close enough to start off with coronal mass ejection if it comes in. I don't know if I would believe the times and date, which is, crying wolf too often. The guys that say this of the kill zone and this and that, they're always wrong. They're always flogging me a new book, a new video, a new this and that. It gets nauseating. And that's why Professor McCanney, I think, is being careful. But on the other side, he's written books and made on television appearances talking about, quote, Planet X as a very likely a star or a large planet-like object. And he's presented a lot of evidence over the past decade. So I think Professor McCanney is trying to, not make any commitments, but these guys are trying to push him.
Well, he's made his record, and he can stand on his record without having to really say much else.
Right, now I think that's good. And what I want to do is clarify. I agree with McCanney. I think this object is pretty far out. My guess is at least double the distance of Jupiter, but it is coming in. And what's coming in right now are not only 1 or 2 comets, but probably a whole trail of these guys. When it really starts being a light show is when this object starts to get into the area of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Then you're just going to really start seeing things start to go crazy. And as it crosses the ecliptic, and we start seeing superstorms on the sun, that's going to get bad just because of the presence at a distance of this object, which could be later this decade. My guess is, though, in the next few years we're going to suffer comets whipping in a lot of light shows. If any of these CMEs are directed at us, we had this one 3 weeks ago, that if it hit us, we would have been in a world of hurt. Tell us about that, Ed, because this one really freaked out the government, and they realized, like, whoosh, like they say in the military, if you hear a bullet whiz past your ear, that means you're not dead.
Well, I think that the scary part is that I was watching the text, the warnings that were coming off the sun, where they tell you about the flares and the magnitude and the duration and all that, there were no CMEs released by the sun. These CMEs are coming from someplace else.
Yeah.
And and they, for some reason, we don't, what can I say? The Ison comet will have a close approach to the sun at the end of November, and then it'll continue back out. It'll be coming in tangentially to the solar system, and it won't really approach any planets, but when it goes behind the sun, it's like, well, when it gets close to the sun, it's going to be at 800,000 miles from the surface of the sun. It's bound to perturbate the sun. In other words, there'll be flares and activities and all that, and CMEs. And as the sun rotates, then that activity will continue, and then the Earth and Venus and Mars would be in the way, and could, in the early, let's say the first quarter of 2014, could suffer direct damage from solar flares that were caused by Ison. Now, in addition, at the end of 2004, in October, there's going to be another comet, another hyperbolic...
14, you mean? 2014, you mean?
Well, yeah, what did I say? 2014 in October.
Yeah.
At the end of October 2014, there's a Siding Spring comet that's coming in. It was just discovered this year. And it's going to be very close to Mars. And I've just pulled the numbers off. It's going to approach, the nominal distance to Mars will be 76,000 miles. The minimum distance will be 24,000 miles, and the maximum distance would be 130,000 miles. And that's because there's uncertainty in the measurements. As Siding Spring gets closer, they'll get the orbit better refined. So there's every possibility that Siding Spring could smash into Mars, could create more moons on Mars, and could actually give it a atmosphere. And so that'll be worth watching even before it gets to the sun. Of course, if it hits Mars, it won't get to the sun.
That's amazing. Now, the other disasters you see that we should prepare for, we had on the show earlier this week, we had Brent Sr. from Doomsday Castle, and they have 7 more series on. It's on Tuesday nights at Nat Geo, 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern. And, the family, they have 10 kids, and they're training them up to know how to defend this Doomsday Castle in North Carolina. I think it's an admirable policy. The only thing I disagreed with is, he said, well, he thinks the government's preparing, and they're doing the right thing. I'm thinking, no. And he said, we all want patriots. I said, well, it's not unpatriotic to question your government, because they should have hardened the power grid, because we don't have manufacturing of step-down transformers that they blow. We should have notified the people to make certain that they have the food, water, and other supplies, because the government's not going to bring them. If you're waiting for FEMA to bring a big truck full of bottled water and MREs and other food, you expect them to kind of give you nice warm blankets, make sure you've got tents and can take care of you because your house is unstable because you got hit with an earthquake, or to salve your burns if you got second-degree burns because you went out in the sun in the middle of the day and the ultraviolet light burnt you. No, they're not going to have that. And I got to tell people that the government's not preparing. What they're doing, and this is something I want to repeat again so people get it, because you're not going to hear it anywhere else. The government is trying to create disasters like the marathon bombing in Boston, like the Middle Eastern War, like 9/11, so that they can control the chaos before things get into galactic and cosmic events that they can't control. And so they want control now with their databases and their biometric world currency and their NSA spying, so that we won't interfere with their survival with the seeds in Sakhalin Island, Svalbard, Norway, their stem cell supply stored underground in vaults, so they can recreate the human race. Literally a seed vault, like the seed vault of stem cells of Noah. Believe it or not, they do have this. You don't realize that the globalists, quote, don't need or want us. In fact, they just want to make sure we don't interfere with their survival. That's why they're not being forthcoming. That's why they're fully stocked up there. And if you look at the requisitions of supplies, and we talk to all the supplying companies that supply us, not only from the eFoods people here, but, our Ready Store and our Wise Foods, which we have 2 different suppliers on our Nutimedical show, they're all being tapped up by the government. And the reason is they're ready. John, your comment.
Well, they are ready, and we need to get ready, spiritually, mentally, and physically.
Yeah, we need to get ready. And listen to your show again. We got to correct the time. It's 6 to 7 Central Time, Monday to Friday.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to another amazing weekend. And we better prepare again. Every day I do a little bit of preparation. You know, as I tell you, every day is a sunny day. Every day is a day to smile. Every day is a day to prayer. And every day is a day to prep. I call it the prepper's prayer. Prepper's prayer.
I say dig fast, dig deep.
There you go.
Get an underground bunker.
Yeah, it's going to get hairy. And, you know, as I say, I saw the guy named Doomsday Prepper. A year before the disaster, you're considered an idiot. A day after it, you're considered a genius.